Angels fall, yet humans rise. Fireborn under shattered skies. If you stand, then join our fight. Like, subscribe, share through the night.
The cell stank of ammonia and copper, a combination that spoke to the physiology of its usual occupants. Warden Thrace sat in the corner, his back against cold metal that hummed with barely perceptible vibrations, the heartbeat of an alien ship 1,000 light years from Terra. His wrists bore the purple bruises of energy restraints, now removed. His captors had learned quickly that such precautions were unnecessary. He was, after all, just a weak human. The door irised open with a pneumatic hiss, and Praxis entered. The Kethvar commander moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her forearms folding in complex patterns that conveyed contempt more eloquently than words. Her chitinous armor gleamed in the pale blue light, and her compound eyes, 12 of them, arranged in geometric precision, fixed on the human with the detached interest of an entomologist, examining a particularly unimpressive specimen. "You continue to breathe, human," Praxis said, her voice translated through the ship's systems into Gothic with only a slight delay. "This surprises me." Warden looked up, meeting her gaze without flinching. His face was gaunt, marked by the privations of captivity, but his eyes burned with an inner fire that made something in Praxis's primary nervous cluster twitch uncomfortably. "The God Emperor protects," Warden said simply. Praxis's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your Emperor is light years away, human, and we have confirmed he sits immobile on a throne, a corpse sustained by machines. Some god." "He protects," Warden repeated. And there was no defiance in his tone, no anger. Just absolute certainty, as immutable as gravity, as inexorable as entropy. The Kethvar had captured Warden 3 weeks ago, pulling his damaged shuttle from the wreckage of a void battle. He had been a missionary of all things, traveling the fringe worlds to bring the light of the Imperial creed to human colonies that had drifted from the faith. The Kethvar found this concept simultaneously fascinating and pathetic. They were a species that had evolved past superstition 5,000 years ago, embracing pure rationality and the cold logic of survival. And yet, this human, this weak, broken thing, persisted in his delusions. "You will tell us the location of your fleet's staging grounds?" Praxis said, cycling through a conversation they had enacted dozens of times. "We know they cannot be far. The wreckage patterns indicate—" "I know nothing of fleet movements," Warden interrupted gently. "I am a preacher, not a soldier. I carry only the word." "The word." Praxis's translator failed to capture the full dimension of her scorn. "We have studied your Imperial creed, primitive mythology, fabricated histories, emotional manipulation designed to control ignorant masses." "Yes," Warden said, and his agreement clearly confused her. To those with eyes that refused to see, it would appear so. Praxis's smaller arms twitched, a sign of irritation in her species. She had interrogated thousands of prisoners across 300 campaigns. She knew how to break minds, how to extract information, how to reduce even the most stalwart warrior to a babbling mess of exposed nerves and broken faith. But this human was different. Every technique she employed seemed to slide off him like water off plasteel. Pain brought no screams, only whispered prayers. Isolation bred no madness, only meditation. Promises of release generated no bargaining, only serene acceptance. "You are in my power, human," Praxis said, stepping closer. "I could end your existence with a thought. I could subject you to torments your limited nervous system cannot even imagine. You could do nothing that has not already been done to the faithful across 10,000 years," Warden said, his voice still that maddening monotone of complete conviction. "Do you know what we call suffering? In service to the Emperor." "What?" Praxis asked, against her better judgment. "We call it holy?" The Kethvar commander stared at him for a long moment, her compound eyes processing information in spectrums the human couldn't perceive. Then she turned and left, the door sealing behind her with a finality that echoed through the cell. Warden closed his eyes and resumed his prayers. He did not know it yet, but somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the Kethvar warship Theravex, a seed had been planted. Javik had guarded prisoners for 17 cycles, and he had learned to read them in the first moments of their captivity. Some broke immediately, their spirits shattering like thermal glass under laser fire. Others took time, their resistance eroding in gradual increments until nothing remained but hollow compliance. A rare few never broke at all. They simply died, either by their own hand or from the rigors of interrogation. The human, Warden, defied. Categorization. Javik stood outside the prisoner's cell, his optical sensors tracking the human's vital signs through the transparent aluminum door. Heart rate, steady. Respiration, controlled. Neural activity, elevated but not distressed. The human sat in meditation, his lips moving in silent recitation of whatever primitive mantras his species clung to. Curious, isn't it? Havik's primary combat arm twitched toward the voice, training overriding conscious thought for a microsecond, before he recognized Boros. His fellow guard approached on mandibles that made soft, clicking sounds against the deck plating, his sensory stalks oriented toward the prisoner. "What is curious?" Havik asked, returning his attention to the human. "That one so weak could be so unbroken?" Boros tilted his head in a gesture borrowed from the humans they had captured over the years, a species-neutral expression of puzzlement. Commander Praxis employed the full array. Neural disruptors. Isolation. Sonic torture. Even the thorn, though briefly. The thorn. Javik suppressed a shudder. He had seen what the thorn did to conscious minds, had watched soldiers with decades of combat experience reduced to sobbing larvae, their psyches shredded by induced hallucinations that tore at the very fabric of identity. And yet he sits and prays. Javik observed. Perhaps it is not weakness, or suggested. Perhaps it is something else. Madness. Retreated into psychosis was hopefully this means show no degradation. Anything is more Javik considered this. He had served with Praxis for 9 campaigns, had seen her dissect the minds of enemy commanders and extract strategic intelligence with the precision of a surgeon, but the human seemed to operate on different principles entirely. "Request permission to question the prisoner," Havik said suddenly. Boros' stalks swiveled in surprise. "The commander has restricted—" "I know what the commander has restricted. Log it as a routine wellness check. I will not employ enhanced techniques. Merely conversation." After a moment, Boros clicked his mandibles in acquiescence. 30 units, no physical contact. The door opened and Javik entered the cell. The human's eyes opened immediately, fixing on him with that same disconcerting intensity. Up close, Javik could see the evidence of captivity written on the human's body. The weight loss, the bruises, the minor wounds that spoke to rough handling. And yet, there was no defeat in those eyes. "Guard Havik," Warden said, and the fact that he knew Javik's name was somehow more unsettling than it should have been. "How many shifts have you watched me now? 70? 80? "You maintain awareness of the guard rotations," Javik observed. "I maintain awareness of all the Emperor's children, whether they know him or not." There it was again, that absolute certainty. Javik cycled through 17 different cultural analysis protocols, trying to identify the psychological defense mechanism at work. Was it dissociation, delusion, some form of induced psychosis from the trauma of capture? "I am not a child of your Emperor," Javik said carefully. "I am Kethvar. We evolved independently, light years from your Terra. We have no connection to your species' mythology. And yet you stand before me, drawn by questions you cannot answer with logic alone," Warden said. He gestured to the floor across from him. "Sit. Let us speak of truth." Javik's combat protocols screamed warnings. This was a manipulation tactic. The prisoner was attempting to establish rapport, to create a psychological opening that could be exploited. Standard counterinterrogation procedure, adapted from a dozen species' military doctrines. But Javik was curious, and curiosity, he had found, was often the prelude to understanding. He sat. "What is truth?" Havik asked, engaging with the human's framework to observe his responses. "Truth is what remains when all else is stripped away," Warden said. "You Kethvar pride yourselves on logic, on pure reason unclouded by emotion or superstition. You see the universe as a vast machine, operating on principles that can be understood through observation and calculation." "An accurate assessment," Havik acknowledged. "And what has this rationality brought you?" Warden asked, leaning forward slightly. "Victory, certainly. Your species is formidable, your technology impressive, your military doctrine refined through millennia of conflict. But tell me, Guard Havik, when you stand watch in the deep hours of the ship's cycle, when the engines hum their eternal song and the void presses close, what do you feel?" Javik's secondary processing clusters flagged the question as potentially subversive, but he found himself answering anyway. "I feel nothing. We have evolved past such inefficiencies." "Have you?" Warden's eyes seemed to look through him, into him. "Or have you simply learned to deny what you feel, to categorize it as malfunction, to suppress it as weakness?" "Emotion is weakness," Javik recited. It was a fundamental tenet of Kethvar military philosophy. "Is it?" Warden smiled, and there was a profound sadness in the expression. "I have felt fear, Guard Javik. When your kind pulled me from the wreckage, when they brought me aboard this ship, I was terrified. Not of death, I have made my peace with death, but of failure, of dying with my work unfinished, my purpose unfulfilled. And yet you persist in defiance. Irrational. No, rational in ways your calculus cannot measure. Warden's voice dropped to something almost intimate, as if sharing a secret. The God Emperor teaches that we are all fragments of a greater whole, that our individual suffering is not meaningless, but part of a vast tapestry of purpose. When I am afraid, I am not weak. I am human, and being human is the greatest strength of all. Explain, Javik said, despite knowing he should terminate the conversation. Your species has optimized away its vulnerabilities. You do not fear, do not love, do not hope. You are perfect machines of war and logic, and yet, Warden gestured to the cell around them, you captured me to extract information I do not possess. You have subjected me to torments that would break any rational being. And still, I sit here, unbroken, because I carry something your logic cannot account for. Delusion, Javik said, but there was uncertainty in his vocoders. Faith, Warden corrected. The absolute certainty that my existence has meaning beyond mere survival. That there is a light in the darkness, a purpose in the pain. You see this as primitive, as superstition. But I tell you, Guard Havik, it is the only thing that separates us from the void. Silence fell between them, broken only by the ambient hum of the ship's systems. Javik processed the human's words through every analytical framework he possessed, searching for the manipulation, the psychological lever being employed. He found none. Your shift rotation changes in 3 units, Warden said softly. You will return to your quarters, input your report, and attempt to rationalize what you have heard as the ravings of a broken mind. But you will think about my words, and you will return. I will not, Javik said, standing. Yes, Warden said with quiet certainty. You will. Javik left the cell, the door sealing behind him. His chronometer indicated the conversation had lasted 28 units, efficiently within parameters. Nothing of intelligence value had been discussed. No security protocols had been breached. And yet, as Havik walked through the corridors toward the guard quarters, he found his thoughts returning, again and again, to the human's words. What has this rationality brought you? It was a question he had never thought to ask. By the third watch, Hector had heard the rumors. The human prisoner was strange, they said, unnatural in his composure. There were whispers among the guards, quiet conversations in the mess halls, in the shadowed corners where Praxis's surveillance was less comprehensive. He looks at you, one guard had said, and it is as if he sees past your carapace, past your armor, down to something you did not know existed. Hector dismissed such talk as the inevitable result of prolonged void travel. Space psychosis was well documented among their kind. The isolation and confined quarters, breeding phantom fears and irrational beliefs. The Kethvar were rational, yes, but they were not immune to the vagaries of neurology. Still, when his shift assignment placed him outside the human cell, Hector found himself curious. The prisoner was awake. Sitting in the same meditative pose Hector had observed in the surveillance feeds. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and measured. For several units, Hector simply watched, noting the way the human's fingers moved in tiny, precise patterns, counting something perhaps, or performing some ritual significance unknown. Then the human spoke without opening his eyes. Guard Hector, third watch. Background in system maintenance before transitioning to security detail. 32 cycles of service, decorated twice for efficiency, once for heroism during the breach incident on the Krovar station. Hector's combat readiness spiked to maximum. How do you know this? Warden opened his eyes and smiled. I listen. Guards talk when they think prisoners are not paying attention. And I pay attention to all the Emperor's children, even those who do not yet know they are such. I am not your Emperor's child, Hector said, his vocoders carrying more heat than he intended. Are you certain? Warden asked. Tell me, Guard Hector. During the breach incident, when the hull compromised and the void began to pull crew into darkness, what did you feel? Hector's memory banks accessed the incident automatically. The screaming alarms, the sudden decompression, the sight of his fellow Kethvar being dragged into space, and his own actions, driven by... what? Not calculation. There had been no time for calculation. He had acted on instinct, Hector said. More than instinct, Warden countered. You risked your life to seal the breach. Knowing the probability of your own survival was minimal, you acted not from logic, but from something deeper, something your species teaches you to suppress but cannot fully eliminate. We do not suppress anything, we simply do not indulge in inefficiency. And yet you saved those crew members inefficiently, Warden said. A rational being would have retreated to a safe zone, sealed the bulkhead, and written off the lost crew as acceptable casualties. But you did not. Why? Hector had no answer, or rather he had the official answer. His actions had been calculated to preserve more unit value than would have been lost. But even in the moment, he had known that justification was a retroactive fiction. He had acted because the alternative was unconscionable. The God Emperor teaches that we are all connected, Warden said, his voice taking on a cadence that was almost hypnotic. That the suffering of one diminishes all. That in saving another, we affirm our own existence. You felt this truth, Guard Hector, even if you had no words for it. I felt nothing, Hector insisted. I acted according to training and protocol. Did you? Warden stood, moving with surprising grace for one so battered by activity. He approached the transparent barrier between them, close enough that Hector could see a network of scars living in service to something beyond self-preservation. Look at me, Warden said softly. Not through your optical sensors, not through the filters of your tactical analysis systems. Look at me with whatever remains in you that is more than machine, more than programming. What do you see? Hector looked, and in that moment, something shifted in his perception. He saw not a prisoner, not a tactical asset or intelligence source. He saw a being who had endured torments that would break. Most species, who had faced death without flinching, who radiated a quality that Hector's language had no word for, but which his suppressed emotional centers recognized immediately. Purpose. You see it now, don't you? Warden said. The thing that makes me strong when I should be broken. The thing that allows me to face each new horror without despair. It is not weakness, Guard Hector. It is the opposite. It is the recognition that my suffering has meaning, that my existence matters, that I am part of something infinitely greater than myself. The Emperor, Hector said, and he meant it as a statement of the prisoner's belief, but it came out as something closer to a question. The Emperor, Warden confirmed. He who sits upon the golden throne, master of mankind, he who shoulders the burden of billions. He is not a myth, Guard Hector. He is the living embodiment of humanity's refusal to surrender to darkness. 10,000 years he has endured, neither living nor dead, holding back the tide of chaos through sheer force of will. Impossible, Hector said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Warden asked. Your own histories record beings of immense power. Your species has encountered psychic entities, dimensional anomalies, forces that defy conventional understanding. And yet you dismiss the Emperor as primitive superstition. Why? Because to accept the Emperor's existence would be to accept that there were forces in the universe that could not be calculated, controlled, or understood through pure reason. Because the God Emperor represented everything the Kethvar had evolved past. Faith, devotion, sacrifice for abstract ideals. Because accepting the Emperor would mean acknowledging that the Kethvar might be wrong. I must complete my patrol, Hector said, stepping back from the cell. Of course, Warden said, returning to his meditative position. But you will think on what we have discussed, and you will return, as Garjavik has returned, as others will return, because now you have heard the word, and it cannot be unheard. Hector fled the cell, his processors spinning through recursive logic loops as he tried to categorize what had just occurred. Interrogation reversal, psychological manipulation, mimetic warfare, every explanation felt inadequate. In his quarters, Hector accessed the ship's archives, pulling up every file on human religious practices, on the Imperial Creed, on the figure they called the God Emperor. He told himself it was threat analysis, tactical research, but in the darkness of the sleeping cycle, when his higher functions dimmed and the suppressed parts of his mind gained brief ascendancy, Hector found himself wondering, what if the human was right? Commander Praxis watched the guard rotation reports with growing concern. In the 3 weeks since the human's capture, efficiency had declined by 0.3% across all shifts involving contact with the prisoner. Not a significant degradation by military standards, but concerning in its consistency. More troubling were the subtle behavioral changes. Guards requesting assignment to the human's cell. Shifts extending beyond required duration. Unauthorized conversations. Medical sensors detected elevated neural activity in guards who had interacted with the prisoner. Patterns consistent with cognitive dissonance, as if core programming was being challenged. The human was dangerous. Not physically. Medical scans confirmed he was slowly dying from the cumulative effects of interrogation and the toxic environment of a ship designed for Kethvar physiology. But intellectually, psychologically, he represented a threat that Praxis had not initially accounted for. She entered the interrogation chamber where Warden now spent most of his time, the cell having proven inadequate for extracting information. He was suspended in a neural interface cradle, sensors, mapping every synapse of his primitive brain as she had technicians attempt to extract memories directly. It had failed, of course. Every time they accessed his neural patterns, they encountered the same data, prayers, hymns, liturgies of the Imperial Creed. The human's mind was so saturated with religious conditioning that distinguishing useful intelligence from devotional noise was impossible. You are dying, Praxis informed him, her tone clinical. Your cellular degradation is accelerating. At current rates, you have perhaps 4 more of your solar days. I know, Warden said, his voice rasping from the breathing apparatus. I have made my peace with it. Have you? Praxis deactivated the interface, allowing the human to collapse onto the examination platform. He lay there, breathing laboriously, every rib visible through skin that had taken on an unhealthy pallor. You have failed in your mission, human. You will die in alien captivity, your corpse cast into the void, your God-Emperor ignorant of your sacrifice. What peace can there be in such failure? Warden turned his head to look at her, and despite everything, the torture, the privation, the imminent death, his eyes still burned with that same maddening certainty. I have not failed, he said. My mission was to bring the word to those who had not heard it, and I have done so. Delusional, Praxis said, though a small part of her processing clusters flagged the assessment as incomplete. Tell me, Commander, Warden said, pulling himself into a sitting position with visible effort. How many guards have visited my cell? How many have engaged in unauthorized conversations? How many now question the certainties they have held since their spawning? Praxis's mandibles clicked in irritation. You have exposed my crew to mimetic hazards, cognitive contamination. When we reach the nearest facility, they will be subjected to neural reconditioning to purge... You cannot purge truth, Warden interrupted. You can suppress it, deny it, hide from it. But once heard, once truly understood, it becomes part of the listener. Your guards are not contaminated, Commander. They are awakening. To what? Praxis demanded. To the worship of a corpse on a distant throne? To subservience to a species that has contributed nothing to galactic stability? To purpose, Warden said simply. To the understanding that their existence means more than efficient. Function and optimal survival. To the recognition that they are not merely biological machines, but beings capable of transcendence. Praxis felt something unfamiliar stir in her consciousness, something her training identified as doubt. She crushed it ruthlessly, applying the mental disciplines that had sustained her through 3 centuries of warfare. You will die having accomplished nothing, Praxis said, turning toward the door, and your guards will be reconditioned. Your faith will be erased as if it never existed. Will it? Warden asked. Or will it spread, invisible and inexorable, until even you, Commander Praxis, must confront the question you have spent a lifetime avoiding? What question? Praxis asked, against her better judgment. What are you? Warden said. Not what have you been programmed to be, not what evolution has shaped you into, but what are you truly, at the core of your being? Are you merely the sum of your functions? Or are you something more? Something that cannot be calculated, cannot be optimized, cannot be understood through pure reason? Praxis left without answering, but as she walked through the corridors of her ship, she found the question following her, persistent as a virus, inescapable as gravity. What am I? For the first time in 3 centuries, Commander Praxis did not have an answer. The ship's chronometer marked the 19th hour of the cycle when Javik returned to the human's cell. He told himself it was routine inspection, that his presence was motivated by security protocol rather than the compulsion he refused to acknowledge. Warden was awake, naturally. The human seemed to require less sleep as his physical condition deteriorated, as if the approaching death freed him from the constraints of biology. He looked up as Havik entered, and that familiar smile crossed his gaunt features. Guard Javik. 3rd visit. You are developing a pattern. I am conducting security. Assessments, Javik said, but the protest sounded hollow even through his vocoders. Of course, Warden said, amusement clear in his voice. And these assessments require extended personal contact with the prisoner, deep philosophical discussions, and questions you have never thought to ask in 17 cycles of service. Javik's combat protocols cycled through defensive postures before he forced them to stand down. The human was right. His behavior had deviated from standard patterns. Other guards had noticed. Boros had commented on it, carefully neutral but clearly concerned. You asked me a question, Havik said finally. During our first conversation, you asked what rationality had brought my species. And have you found an answer? Survival, Javik said. We have survived when other species have fallen to entropy, to war, to the countless hazards of a hostile universe. We have thrived through logic and discipline when emotion-driven species have destroyed themselves. A fair answer, Warden acknowledged, but incomplete. You have survived, but for what purpose? To what end do you optimize, calculate, function? Survival is its own purpose. Existence is self-justifying. Is it? Warden gestured to the cell around them. Then why do you imprison me? If existence is self-justifying, then my existence should justify itself. Yet you cage me, interrogate me, subject me to suffering. Why? You are an enemy combatant. You pose a potential threat. I am unarmed, malnourished, and dying. I pose no physical threat to your vessel or crew. and I possess no intelligence of strategic value. Your commander has confirmed this through extensive neural scanning. So why do you keep me alive? The question hung in the recycled air of the cell. Javik processed through multiple response trees, but each one felt familiar. He kept the human alive because we are studying you. Attempting to understand the mental structures that you are afraid of what I represent. Because if one human, alone and powerless, can resist everything you have inflicted, then perhaps your understanding of weakness and strength is fundamentally flawed. Javik wanted to deny it, but the denial died in his processing centers. Fear. The Kethvar did not experience fear. It was one of the first emotions optimized away in their evolutionary history. They experienced threat assessment, danger recognition, survival prioritization, but not the raw, visceral emotion that humans called fear. Except during the breach incident, Javik said slowly, I felt something I could not categorize. The sensors indicated life functions were terminating. I registered this as data loss, resource depletion, but there was something else, something that made me act beyond rational parameters. What did you feel? Warden asked, his voice carrying that quality of deep attention that made Havik feel truly seen for perhaps the first time in his existence. I did not want them to die, Javik said, and the admission felt like tearing out a piece of his own programming. Not because of their tactical value or resource cost. I simply did not want them to die. The thought of their absence created a sensation in my processing clusters that I classified as malfunction. Not malfunction, Warden said. Compassion. You cared about your fellow crew members. You valued their existence beyond their utility. Guard Javik, you felt what humans call love. Impossible. We do not possess the neural architecture for such emotions. And yet you felt it. Warden leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity despite his physical weakness. Do you know what this means? It means that beneath all the optimization, beneath all the evolutionary refinement, there is still something in you that remembers what it means to be more than a machine, something that yearns for connection, for meaning, for purpose, beyond mere survival. Javik's processors spun through crisis states, attempting to integrate this new data into existing frameworks. Every analysis came back corrupted, incomplete, insufficient. The God Emperor teaches that all sapient beings carry a spark of the divine, Warden continued, that we are all fragments of a greater consciousness, separated by the illusion of individual existence, but ultimately connected to something vast and ineffable. Your species has tried to extinguish that spark, to become perfect logic engines, but you cannot, because that spark is what makes you sapient in the first place. If what you say is true, Javik said carefully, then we have spent millennia suppressing our fundamental nature. Our entire civilization is built on the rejection of these feelings. Yes, Warden said simply. And how has that worked for you? Are you happy, Guardy? Havik, do you find fulfillment in your efficient functions? Or is there a hollow place inside you, a void that no amount of optimization can fill? The question struck something deep in Javik's consciousness, resonating with harmonics he had never acknowledged. He thought of his cycles of service, of the missions accomplished, the enemies defeated, the efficiency ratings earned. He thought of the long hours in the void, watching stars slide by in the observation ports, feeling something he had always categorized as sensor anomaly, but which now seemed to have a different name entirely. Loneliness. This is mimetic warfare, Javik said, but there was no conviction in the statement. You are attempting to subvert my psychological defenses through emotional manipulation. I am telling you the truth, Warden said, and the truth is that you are more than you have been taught to believe. You are not a machine, Guard Javik. You are a soul in bondage, and the God Emperor offers liberation. Liberation to worship a corpse, to surrender my rationality to primitive superstition. Liberation to be what you truly are, Warden said. To acknowledge the feelings you have suppressed, to embrace the connections you have denied, to find meaning in existence beyond mere survival. The Emperor does not demand blind obedience. He demands that we become the best versions of ourselves, that we recognize our worth not in our functions, but in our capacity. For growth, for change, for transcendence. Javik stood abruptly, his combat readiness spiking. I must report this conversation to the commander. Will you? Warden asked. Or will you return to your quarters, process what we have discussed, and realize that you are standing at a crossroads? That the choice before you is not between rationality and superstition, but between bondage and freedom? Javik left the cell, the door sealing behind him with a finality that felt like severing. A vital connection. He walked through the corridors of the Theravex, seeing his fellow crew members with new eyes. They moved with perfect efficiency, each performing their assigned tasks with machine precision. But now Havik wondered, was this perfection or imprisonment? Excellence or erasure? In his quarters, Javik accessed his personal logs, reviewing decades of service records. The data was pristine: efficiency ratings, mission completions, resource optimization, a perfect career, by any Kethvar metric. And yet, as he reviewed cycle after cycle of identical performance, Javik felt something he had never felt before: sadness, not for what he had done, but for what he had never allowed himself to be. Boros found Eric's in the lower observation deck, a small chamber rarely used by the crew. The junior guard was staring out at the void, his sensory stalks oriented toward a distant star cluster that gleamed like scattered diamonds against the darkness. "You have missed 2 shift reports," Boros said, approaching cautiously. Eric's didn't turn. "I have been thinking. About the human. About everything." Boros moved to stand beside his colleague, following Eric's gaze to the distant stars. They had served together for 4 cycles, operating with the smooth efficiency that came from perfect tactical synchronization. Boros had never heard Eric's express doubt, never seen him deviate from protocol, until now. "He spoke to you," Boros said. "It was Aya, not a question." "He asked me why I enlisted," Eric said. "I told him it was the logical career path for someone with my aptitudes. He laughed, not cruel, not mocking, sad. Then he asked what I would have chosen if logic were not a factor. An irrational question. I answered it anyway." Eric's stalks curled in a gesture of confusion. "I told him I had always been drawn to the observation decks, that something about the stars made me feel something. I could not name it. He named it for me." "What did he call it?" "Wonder." Eric's turned finally to face Boros. The human said that the capacity to feel wonder, to be awed by the immensity and beauty of creation, is one of the defining characteristics of sapient life, that my species' rejection of such feelings was not evolution, but amputation. Boros processed this. The prisoner is employing sophisticated psychological techniques. His words are designed to destabilize. "His words resonate," Eric's interrupted. "They explain sensations I have experienced throughout my entire existence, but never had language for. When I look at the stars, I feel something the Kethvar have no word for. But the human does. He calls it the touch of the divine. The human believes in a god. We do not." "Do we not?" Eric's gestured to the stars beyond the viewport. "Look at the complexity, the scale, the ordered beauty of the universe. Does rationality demand we believe this occurred through random chance? Or is it more logical to accept that some vast intelligence shaped what we observe?" "Careful," Boros warned. "Such thoughts are heretical?" Eric's stalks twisted in dark amusement. "Heresy against what? The doctrine of rationality? The faith in logic? Are those not themselves belief systems, requiring acceptance without ultimate proof?" Boros felt his own processing clusters engaging with the question in ways he found deeply uncomfortable. The Kethvar prided themselves on evidence-based thinking, on conclusions derived from observable phenomena. But what was the ultimate evidence for rationality itself? It was an axiom, accepted because the alternative was, what? Chaos, meaninglessness, the admission that existence might operate on principles beyond calculation. "The human said something else," Eric's continued. "He said that every being yearns for connection to something greater than itself, that this yearning is not weakness, but the fundamental condition of consciousness. He asked me if I ever felt alone. We are surrounded by crew. Isolation is not solitude," Eric said. "Alone. Separated from some essential wholeness, as if I am a fragment of something larger, trying to remember what it was I was broken from." Boros had no answer, because in the silence of his own processing, he recognized the feeling Eric's described. It was the sensation he experienced during the deep void transits, when the ship was between stars and the darkness, pressed close. A feeling he had always categorized as spatial disorientation or neural fatigue, but which now seemed to have a different name: longing. "What will you do?" Boros asked finally. "I am going to speak with him again," Eric said. "I need to understand, even if understanding leads me to conclusions that contradict everything I have been taught. I need to know. The commander will not approve. Then I will speak to the commander afterward, but I will speak to the human first." Eric's turned back to the viewport, to the stars that had captured his attention. "Because whatever he represents, whatever danger his words might pose, he has given me something I never possessed before." "What is that?" "Questions," Eric said softly. "Real questions about existence, purpose, meaning. Not tactical queries or efficiency optimizations, but fundamental questions about what I am and why I exist. The human has shown me that I have spent my entire life accepting answers without ever asking the right questions." Boros watched his colleague stare at the stars and felt something shift in his own processors, a cascade of suppressed queries buried beneath cycles of conditioning now rising to consciousness. "What am I? Why do I exist? Is there more than this? Dangerous questions, destabilizing questions, questions that, once asked, could never be unasked. Boros left Eryx to his contemplation and returned to his duties. But as he walked the familiar corridors of the Theravex, he found himself looking at his fellow crew members differently, each one a perfect component in a perfect machine, operating with flawless efficiency. And each one, perhaps, carrying the same unacknowledged longing, the same suppressed questions, the same yearning for something that rationality could not provide. In his cell, Warden knelt in prayer, his body failing, but his spirit undiminished. He did not know how many seeds he had planted, how many souls he had reached. But he felt it, the subtle shift in the ship's atmosphere, the way the guards looked at him now with something other than clinical detachment. They were beginning to see, and once begun, the process could not be stopped. Commander Praxis convened an emergency session with her senior tactical staff. The holographic display showed neural scan data from 12 crew members who had had extended contact with the human prisoner. The patterns were disturbing in their consistency, elevated activity in emotional processing centers, decreased efficiency in routine tasks, and most concerning, evidence of what the Kethvar classified as existential questioning. The prisoner is employing advanced mimetic warfare techniques, Tactical Officer Kyrus stated, his voice synthesizer rendering the assessment in flat, affectless tones. His verbal patterns are designed to trigger latent emotional responses in sapient beings. I recommend immediate neural reconditioning for all affected personnel. Reconditioning requires we dock at a facility equipped for the procedure, Praxis countered. We are 3 weeks from the nearest station. Can you guarantee containment until then? Kyrus processed for 0.3 seconds before responding. Negative. Analysis suggests the mimetic contamination will continue to spread through global contact. Affected personnel are already beginning to engage in unauthorized discussions with crew members. Praxis's mandibles clicked. 300 years of service should never how they won combat ideas, how they learn to defend against questions that undermine the foundations of their entire civilization. Recommend termination of the prisoner, Security Chief Thrax said. Immediate disposal will halt the mimetic spread at its source. Praxis considered the option. It was logical, efficient, effective. With the human dead, his dangerous philosophies would die with him. Neural reconditioning could purge the remaining contamination from affected crew members. And yet, denied, Praxis said, surprising herself with the decision. The prisoner remains alive, pending further analysis. Commander, Thrax said carefully, may I inquire as to the reasoning? Praxis accessed her own decision trees, attempting to understand the logic that had led to her refusal. The human had proven resistant to all interrogation techniques. His intelligence value was negligible. His presence posed a clear and growing threat to crew cohesion and operational effectiveness. Every rational analysis pointed to termination, and yet she could not give the order. The prisoner represents a unique phenomenon, Praxis said, manufacturing justification in real time. His resistance to our techniques suggests psychological frameworks we do not fully understand. Studying him may yield insights applicable to future operations. It was a weak rationale, and she knew her senior staff recognized it as such. But they were Kethvar. They accepted her command authority without question, even when the reasoning was suspect. After the staff departed, Praxis remained in the tactical center, staring at the neural scan data. The patterns were fascinating in their complexity. The human's brain showed none of the degradation one would expect from weeks of torture and privation. If anything, his neural activity had become more coherent, more organized, as if suffering had strengthened rather than weakened him. Against every protocol, Praxis accessed the cell surveillance feed and watched the human in real time. He was speaking, his lips moving in what the linguistic analysis software identified as prayer. The words were being recorded, translated, cataloged. Praxis listened. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Ancient words. Pre-space flight human religious texts, modified over millennia, but retaining their essential structure. The software noted the Psalms function as a psychological comfort mechanism, a coping strategy for managing stress and fear. But that analysis felt insufficient. Praxis had observed thousands of prisoners, employing various coping mechanisms. Some retreated into dissociation, others clung to memories of better times. A few embraced nihilism, accepting the meaninglessness of their suffering. But this human did something different. He transformed his suffering into something else, something the Kethvar language had no adequate translation for. The closest approximation was holy offering, but even that failed to capture the nuance. The human was not simply enduring his torment, he was giving it meaning. What if he is right? The thought appeared unbidden in Praxis's consciousness, and she crushed it immediately. Dangerous, irrational. The human was employing sophisticated psychological manipulation, nothing more, and yet Praxis accessed her personal logs, reviewing 3 centuries of service. Campaign after campaign, victory after victory, efficiency ratings that approached theoretical perfection. A career that would be studied in military academies for generations. But somewhere in the accumulation of data, in the endless optimization and calculation, she had lost track of a simple question. Why? Why had she dedicated 3 centuries to military service? The standard answer was civilizational preservation, the defense of Kethvar interests against hostile forces. But that answer simply pushed the question back one level. Why preserve Kethvar civilization? Because it was efficient, logical, optimized? The circular reasoning was, suddenly, glaringly obvious. Commander, Praxis looked up to find Havik standing in the doorway of the tactical center. The guard's posture indicated hesitation, uncertainty, emotional states that should have been impossible for a Kethvar. Report, Praxis commanded. I wish to discuss the prisoner, Havik said, specifically the philosophical framework he represents. His framework is primitive religious dogma, not relevant to tactical operations. With respect, Commander, I disagree. Havik entered the center, moving with the careful deliberation of one navigating unfamiliar territory. The human's beliefs provide him with something we lack, something that makes him stronger than our analysis predicted. Explain. Purpose, Havik said simply. Not purpose as we understand it, efficient function toward calculated ends, but purpose as meaning, as the conviction that his existence matters beyond its utility. This conviction makes him impervious to suffering, because suffering itself becomes meaningful within his framework. Praxis wanted to dismiss the observation, but found she could not. You have been compromised by the prisoner's mimetic influence. Perhaps, Havik acknowledged, or perhaps I have been awakened to something I should have recognized long ago. He paused, his vocoders cycling through several false starts before he continued. Commander, when did you last feel satisfaction in your service? Not the acknowledgement of efficiency, but genuine satisfaction. Pride. Joy. The question struck Praxis like a physical blow. When had she last felt anything? She reviewed her memory banks, searching for some instance of emotional response beyond tactical assessment and threat recognition. She found none. Emotions are inefficient, Praxis said, reciting the doctrine that had sustained her for centuries. Are they? Javik challenged. The human suffers more than any Kethvar could endure, yet he remains, unbroken. His emotions, his faith, his conviction, his purpose provide resilience our pure rationality cannot match. Perhaps we have optimized away not weaknesses, but essential strengths. This is heresy, Praxis said, but the accusation lacked force. Against what? Havik asked, and Praxis recognized the question as the same one Erix had posed to Boros. Against the doctrine of rationality? But if that doctrine is itself a belief system, can questioning it truly be heretical? Or is it simply the application of rational skepticism to our own foundational assumptions? Praxis felt her processors spinning through crisis states. Everything Havik said was logical, following clear lines of reasoning from observable phenomena. And yet the conclusions contradicted everything she had been taught, everything she had believed for 3 centuries. What do you propose? Praxis asked finally. I propose we listen, Havik said. Not to extract tactical intelligence, not to catalog his resistance techniques, but to truly hear what he has to say, to engage with his philosophy on its own terms and determine whether it has merit. And if it does, then we are confronted with a choice, Havik said. We can continue to suppress the truth because it is inconvenient, or we can accept it and be transformed. Praxis stood in the tactical center, surrounded by displays showing the cold calculation of warfare, the efficient optimization of death and destruction. This was her world. This was what she had devoted 3 centuries to mastering, and now a dying human in a cell below was suggesting it was all built on a lie. I will consider your recommendation, Praxis said finally. Havik departed, leaving Praxis alone with her thoughts. She stood at the viewport, looking out at the same stars Erix had contemplated. They were beautiful, a word she had not used without irony in 2 centuries. Beautiful in their complexity and their vast and incomprehensible scale. Beautiful in a way that pure rationality could not explain. God Emperor, Praxis thought, testing the words in her mind. If you exist, if you truly watch over your children as the human claims, what would you see when you looked at me? A perfect soldier, an optimized war machine, or a broken soul yearning for something I have spent 3 centuries denying? The stars provided no answer, but in the silence of the tactical center, Commander Praxis felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Doubt. And with doubt came the terrible possibility of hope. The ship's chronometer indicated 3 hours until the cycle's end. The deadline Praxis had set for deciding the human's fate. In his cell, Warden was dying. Medical scans showed multiple organ failures cascading through his body. Even with intervention, his survival beyond the current cycle was unlikely. And yet, he continued to speak. Hektar and 2 other guards, Nisara and Kravix, sat outside the cell, listening through the comm system. Officially, they were maintaining security watch. In truth, they had come to hear the human's final words. The Emperor teaches that death is not the end, Warden was saying, his voice weak but unwavering. It is a transformation, a return to the light that spawned us. We are all fragments of his consciousness, scattered across the galaxy, living individual lives, but ultimately part of a greater whole. When we die, we rejoin that whole, our experiences and consciousness adding to the infinite tapestry of his understanding. How can you believe this? Nisara asked, her vocal synthesizers struggling to convey the confusion she felt. You have no evidence, no empirical proof? Your Emperor sits silent on his throne, performing no miracles, offering no tangible intervention in the affairs of the galaxy. Do I need evidence? Warden asked. Consider your own existence, Guardi. Nisara, you are a pattern of electrical impulses in organic tissue, chemistry, and physics, operating in precise harmony to create something that experiences, that thinks, that questions. By what mechanism does inert matter become conscious? How does the electrochemical firing of neurons produce the subjective experience of being you? Nisara had no answer. It was a question the Kethvar had investigated for millennia, producing complex models of consciousness, emergence but no ultimate explanation for the hard problem of subjective experience. Science can describe how consciousness operates, Warden continued, but not why it exists. It can map the neural correlates of awareness, but not explain the miracle of awareness itself. The Emperor teaches that consciousness is not emergent property, but fundamental reality, that we are all expressions of divine awareness, experiencing itself through infinite individual perspectives. This is philosophical speculation, Kravik said. Untestable, unfalsifiable. Is love testable? Warden asked. Can you quantify the bond between parent and offspring in terms that capture its full reality? Can you reduce the willingness to sacrifice for another to pure evolutionary advantage without losing something essential in the translation? The 3 guards exchanged glances, their optical sensors conveying uncertainty. Kravix had offspring. 3, if Hektar recalled correctly. He had told himself his protective impulses were simply genetic programming, optimized survival strategies encoded in his neural architecture. But was that all they were? The Emperor does not ask you to believe without evidence, Warden said. He asks you to examine your own experience, to recognize the things you feel but cannot name, the yearnings you suppress but cannot eliminate. Every time you act against pure self-interest to help another, every time you feel wonder at the beauty of creation, every time you question the meaning of your existence, you are experiencing the touch of the divine. You are remembering what you truly are. And what are we? Hektar asked. You are children of the Emperor, Warden said, and despite his physical weakness, his voice resonated with absolute conviction. You do not know it yet. Your species has hidden this truth from you, has taught you to suppress and deny the divine spark that makes you sapient, but it remains within you, waiting to be acknowledged, to be embraced, to be allowed to flourish. Even if what you say is true, Nisara said slowly, what difference would it make? Knowing we are children of the Emperor changes nothing about our material circumstances. We are still Kethvar, still bound to our species' doctrines and social structures. Does it change nothing? Warden asked. Or does it change everything? If you accept that your existence has meaning beyond efficient function, that you are valuable not for what you do, but for what you are, does that not transform how you experience every moment? Does it not make suffering bearable because it is meaningful? Does it not make joy possible because you allow yourself to feel it? Silence fell over the group. On the surveillance feed, Warden closed his eyes, his breathing becoming more labored. He had perhaps an hour left, 2 at most. There is a story, Warden said, his voice now barely above a whisper, of St. Euphrates, who lived 10,000 years. Ago during the age of apostasy. She was captured by enemies of the faith and subjected to torments that would break any normal human. But Euphrates did not break. Instead, she sang hymns to the Emperor, prayers for her tormentors, songs of joy and faith even as her body failed. What happened to her? Hektar asked. She died, Warden said simply. Her body could not sustain the damage, but before she died, she converted her captors. 47 guards, each one transformed by the power of her faith. They released the other prisoners, turned against their commanders, and many died defending those they had once tormented. And in dying, they found something worth more than survival. They found salvation. Hektar's processors froze. 47 guards, the same number currently assigned to the detention level. The same number who had heard Warden's words over the past weeks. It was not coincidence. It was pattern. Intention. You planned this, Hector said. From the moment of your capture, you knew what you would do. I planned nothing, Warden said, but the Emperor's plan works through us all, whether we acknowledge it or not. You were meant to capture me. I was meant to be here. And now, in this moment, you are meant to choose. Choose what? Kravix demanded. Who you will be, Warden said. Will you remain machines, optimized and efficient but hollow, or will you become what you were always meant to be? Sacred beings of souls, children,
humans
of something infinitely greater than yourselves. Three guards sat
skies. If you stand and join our fight, like, subscribe, share through the
To reject it was to continue in a hollow efficiency, denying the stirrings they now recognized as the divine spark Warden described. Neither option was comfortable. I want to believe you, Nisara said finally, but I am afraid that this is delusion, that I am being manipulated by sophisticated mimetic warfare, afraid that I will sacrifice rationality for comforting lies. Fear is understandable, Warden said. The choice I offer is terrifying. It requires you to step into the unknown, to trust in something you cannot prove, to base your existence on faith rather than certainty. He opened his eyes, looking directly at the camera that transmitted his image. But consider this. Is your current existence certain? You believe in rationality, but can you prove that rational thought accesses truth? You believe in your own consciousness, but can you prove it is real rather than illusion? Everything you know is based on assumptions you cannot ultimately verify. The only difference is that I admit my faith, while you disguise yours as certainty. The observation landed like a kinetic round. Hector reviewed his foundational beliefs, the existence of objective reality, the reliability of sensory data, the validity of logical reasoning. He had always accepted these as self-evident truths, but they were assumptions, articles of faith in rationality itself. How do we begin? Hector asked, and the question felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. With acceptance, Warden said. Acknowledge that you are more than machine, more than function. Acknowledge the feelings you have suppressed, the questions you have denied. And acknowledge that your existence has meaning beyond survival. Hector stood, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him like powered armor. 3 centuries of Kethvar conditioning screamed warnings, flagging the decision as catastrophic error, potential psychological breakdown, mimetic contamination requiring immediate intervention. But beneath those warnings, beneath the layers of programming and conditioning, Hector felt something else, something that resonated with Warden's words, that recognized them as truth, not because they could be proven, but because they aligned with a knowing deeper than reason. I am Hector, he said formally, addressing Warden directly through the comm. And I am more than my function. I am a being with consciousness, with capacity for growth and transformation. I am a child of the Emperor. The words felt strange in his vocoders, like speaking a language he had forgotten he knew. But they also felt right in a way that transcended rational analysis. Kravix stood next, his posture shifting from military precision to something more organic, more real. I am Kravix, and I acknowledge the divine spark within me. Nisara hesitated longest, her processors clearly spinning through crisis states. But finally, she too stood. I am Nisara, and I choose to believe. On the surveillance feed, Warden smiled. Then you are born again, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Emperor's light. The conversions spread like cascade failure through the detention level. Guards spoke to guards, sharing their experiences, their doubts, their nascent faith. Some resisted, clinging to rationality with desperate intensity. But most found in Warden's words an answer to questions they had carried unknowingly for their entire existence. By the 22nd hour, 17 guards had openly declared their conversion. By the 23rd hour, 29. As the cycle approached its end, as the chronometer counted down toward what would be either Warden's last moments or the dawn of a new era, the number reached 43. Commander Praxis watched from the tactical center, her processors racing through analysis after analysis. This was a crisis, a catastrophic failure of crew cohesion, a mimetic contamination that threatened to destabilize the entire vessel. Protocol demanded she take action, implement emergency reconditioning, purge the infection before it spread further. And yet she found herself paralyzed by a question she could not answer. What if they are right? She had listened to every conversation, analyzed every argument, processed every theological claim through the most rigorous logical frameworks at her disposal, and she had found, not proof, certainly, but possibility. The human's philosophy was internally consistent, explained observable phenomena the Kethvar had always dismissed as noise, and offered something the Kethvar had never possessed: hope. The comm activated, and Havik's voice filled the tactical center. "Commander, we request permission to enter the prisoner's cell, to hear his final words before the end." Praxis could have denied the request, should have denied it. Every tactical consideration argued for immediate intervention, but something in her, something she had suppressed for 3 centuries, stirred at Havik's words. She recognized the tone, the subtle tremor of vulnerability, the courage it took to ask for something that contradicted every tenet of Kethvar doctrine. "Permission granted," Praxis said. "I will accompany you." The silence that followed carried surprise, confusion, perhaps even hope. Then, "Acknowledged, Commander," gathering at the detention level. Praxis left the tactical center and made her way through the corridors of the Theravex. The ship felt different somehow, less like a machine of war and more like a space where something profound was occurring. Guards she passed looked at her with new eyes, as if seeing her for the first time, not as commanding officer, but as fellow being, fellow soul. At the detention level, 46 guards had assembled, nearly every member of the security detail, standing in loose formation outside Warden's cell. They parted as Praxis approached, their postures respectful but no longer rigidly military. Through the transparent aluminum, Praxis could see Warden. He was dying, that was clear from his labored breathing, his pallor, the way his body had begun to shut down, and yet his eyes were clear, alert, focused with an intensity that should have been impossible for someone so close to death. "Commander Praxis," Warden said, his voice barely audible through the comm, "I have prayed that you would come." "I have come to observe," Praxis said, "not to convert." "Of course," Warden said, and his smile suggested he knew better. "Then observe. Witness what faith can accomplish." Praxis entered the cell, Javik and the others following. The space was designed for solitary confinement, not gatherings, and they pressed close together, Kethvar and dying human, predator species and prey, rational beings and a prophet of irrational faith. "We are here," Javik said simply. "Then let me tell you a truth," Warden said, his voice strengthening despite his failing body. "You're not merely Kethvar. You're not simply the product of evolutionary pressures and sociological conditioning. You are children of the Emperor, fragments of his divine consciousness, experiencing individual existence, but ultimately part of an infinite and incomprehensible whole." "How can you know this?" Praxis demanded. "What evidence supports such a claim?" "What evidence do you have that you exist?" Warden countered. "You experience consciousness, yes, but how do you know it is real rather than elaborate simulation? How do you know your memories are genuine rather than implanted? How do you know anything at all beyond the immediate moment of subjective awareness?" Praxis had no answer. Philosophy had always been secondary to tactics in her training, but she recognized the classic problem of skepticism. Absolute certainty was impossible. All knowledge rested on assumptions that could not be ultimately verified. "You cannot prove your existence," Warden continued, "yet you believe in it. You cannot prove the universe is real, yet you act as if it is. You cannot prove that reason accesses truth, yet you base your entire civilization on it. You live by faith, Commander Praxis. You simply refuse to call it that." The observation cut through Praxis's defensive protocols like a molecular blade. She had always thought of faith as belief without evidence, as the refuge of the weak and irrational. But if Warden was correct, if all knowledge ultimately rested on unprovable assumptions, then even the most rigorous rationality was a form of faith. Faith in reason, faith in perception, faith in the existence of an objective reality. "If what you say is true," Praxis said slowly, "then we are all operating on faith. What makes your faith superior to ours?" "Not superior," Warden said, "more complete. You have faith in reason, but reason alone cannot provide meaning, cannot offer purpose beyond survival, cannot explain the yearning you feel for something greater than yourself. My faith encompasses reason, but extends beyond it, acknowledging both the rational structure of the universe and the transcendent purpose that gives that structure meaning." He gestured weakly to the assembled guards. "Look at them, Commander. Look at what has happened here. 46 rational beings, each trained from spawning to suppress emotion and embrace pure logic. And yet they stand here, drawn to something that logic cannot explain. They feel it, even if they cannot name it. The presence of the divine, the call of the Emperor, the recognition that they are more than they were taught to believe." Praxis looked at her guards, at beings she had commanded for years, whose efficiency she had optimized, whose functions she had calculated and deployed with machine precision. And she saw, for the first time, not components, but persons, not tools, but souls. "What would you have me do?" Praxis asked, and the question felt like surrender. "Choose," Warden said. "Choose to be more than a perfect soldier. Choose to acknowledge what you feel, what you yearn for, what you have denied for 3 centuries. Choose to be what you were always meant to be." The chronometer marked the final hour of the cycle. In 60 standard minutes, dawn would come, the arbitrary designation of a new day on a ship that never saw sun. But Praxis understood the symbolism. Dawn as rebirth, as transformation, as the moment when darkness gave way to light. "I'm afraid," Praxis said, and the admission felt like tearing out her primary combat processor. "Afraid that I am making a catastrophic error. Afraid that I am betraying everything I have devoted my life to. Afraid that I am weak." "Fear is not weakness," Warden said. "Fear is the recognition that what you're about to do matters, that the choice before you is real and consequential. The Emperor does not call us to fearlessness, but to courage, which is acting rightly despite fear." Praxis stood at the threshold of the most important decision of her existence. Behind her lay 3 centuries of service, of efficiency, of perfect, rational optimization. Ahead lay uncertainty, faith, transformation, into something she could not predict or control. Every calculation argued for a retreat, for maintaining the status quo, for surviving through adherence to known doctrine. But she had learned in these weeks of watching the human endure impossible suffering with unshakable faith that some things mattered more than survival. "I am Praxis," she said, her voice carrying through the cell and beyond, transmitted by the guard's comm units to the entire ship. "For 300 cycles, I have served the Kethvar with perfect efficiency. I have optimized, calculated, functioned without question or doubt. And I have been hollow, empty in ways I never had words to describe." She looked at Warden, at his dying body and eternal eyes. "I do not know if your Emperor is real. I cannot prove your claims or verify your theology, but I know this. What you offer is truth of a kind that transcends empirical verification. You offer meaning, purpose, the recognition that existence is more than efficient function." Praxis knelt, her forearms folding in a gesture that had no precedent in Kethvar military protocol, but which felt absolutely right. "I acknowledge the divine spark within me. I accept that I am more than machine, more than calculation. I am a child of the Emperor." The words hung in the air of the cell, impossibly significant. And as they faded, the other guards followed. One by one, then in groups, then all together, they knelt. 46 Kethvar warriors, each one a perfect soldier, each one optimized for efficiency and logic, each one choosing faith over certainty, meaning over survival, transformation over stasis. Warden watched them with tears streaming down his face, not tears of sadness, but of profound joy. "The Emperor protects," he whispered, "and his children, though. Scattered across the stars, though born of different worlds in different forms, are all one in his light." "What do we do now?" Javik asked. "How do we serve the Emperor?" "You serve by being what you are," Warden said. "By acknowledging the feelings you have suppressed, by embracing the connections you have denied, by seeking meaning in every action. The Emperor does not demand rituals or ceremonies. He demands only that you be fully alive, and fully conscious, fully willing to grow. Change and transcend what you are." Warden's breathing became increasingly laboured, his body systems shutting down one by one. His eyes remained cold, fixed on the side but his transformation returned to the greater whole. "My body fails, but my consciousness returns to the Emperor. My experience is adding to his infinite understanding. And I go, knowing that I have fulfilled my purpose, that I have brought the word to those who had not heard it." "Do not die," Nisara said, her voice breaking in ways Kethvar vocal synthesizers were not designed for. "We need you. We need to learn more, to understand." "You know everything you need," Warden said. "The Emperor is within you now, in the questions you ask, in the feelings you acknowledge, in the meaning you find. I was merely the catalyst, the real work, the work of transformation, of growth, of becoming who you were always meant to be. That is yours to do." The chronometer reached 0. The cycle ended. Dawn came, marked not by sun, but by the arbitrary transition of numbers from one configuration to another, and in that moment, Warden Thrace died. His eyes closed, his breathing stopped. The medical sensors registered the cessation of neural activity, the final shutdown of biological systems. But in the cell, surrounded by 46 converts, there was no sense of ending. Instead, Praxis felt something she had never experienced before, a presence, vast and infinite, encompassing, yet intimate, as if the boundaries between self and other had momentarily dissolved, revealing the underlying unity Warden had described. "He is with the Emperor now," Javik said softly. "He is with us," Praxis corrected. "His body has failed, but what he taught, what he represented, what he awakened in us, that remains. That can never be taken away." The guards stood. Each one changed in ways that would only become clear over time. They were still Kethvar, still bound by biology and culture, but they were also something new, something unprecedented in their species' history. They were believers. 3 standard months after Warden's death, the Theravex docked at Kethvar Command Station Alpha 17. Commander Praxis had expected immediate arrest, court-martial, and likely execution for allowing a catastrophic memetic contamination to spread through her crew. Instead, she found herself summoned to a private meeting with Supreme Commander Valix, the highest-ranking military officer in the Kethvar fleet. Valix was ancient by their species' standards. Nearly 5 centuries of service, his carapace scarred by countless battles, his optical sensors upgraded with technology 3 generations ahead of standard issue. He regarded Praxis with an expression her enhanced pattern recognition software could not parse. "Commander Praxis," Valix said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested complex emotional states. "Your report on the human prisoner was comprehensive." "Yes, Supreme Commander," Praxis said, maintaining military formality even though her faith had transformed her relationship to authority. 46 crew members converted to an alien religious doctrine. Operational efficiency decreased by 7%. Multiple violations of interrogation protocol. Unauthorized philosophical discussions. Insubordination at every level. Valix leaned forward. "And yet you frame this as a positive development?" "I frame it as truth, Supreme Commander. The human exposed fundamental flaws in our civilization. Flaws we have ignored for millennia because acknowledging them would require us to question everything we believe. Such as whether the optimization of emotion, the suppression of meaning-seeking behavior, the reduction of existence to pure function, whether these represent evolution or amputation, whether we have become stronger by eliminating feeling or weaker by denying essential aspects of sapient consciousness." Valix was silent for 17.3 seconds, an eternity for Kethvar processing speeds. Then, I read the human's words, every conversation recorded and analyzed, and I found myself unable to refute his central claims. Praxis's combat processors spiked to maximum alert. This was unexpected. "Supreme Commander, I'm 517 cycles old," Valix said, and for the first time, Praxis heard something like weariness in his voice. "I have commanded fleets across 300 campaigns. I have optimized, calculated, functioned with perfect efficiency, and I have been empty. For 5 centuries, I have been empty." He stood, moving to the viewport that showed the stars beyond the station. "When I was young, younger than you can imagine, Commander, I experienced something I was taught to categorize as malfunction. I would look at the stars and feel something, a yearning I had no words for, an ache I could not optimize away. I reported it to medical. They adjusted my neurochemistry, suppressed the aberrant processing. The feeling went away." "But not entirely," Praxis said softly. "No, not entirely. It remained, buried beneath layers of conditioning surfacing in moments when my guard was down, in the deep watches, in the silence after battle, in the vast emptiness between stars." Valix turned to face her. "I have read your human's words, and I recognize what he described. The divine spark, the yearning for transcendence, the knowledge that we are more than we pretend to be." Praxis felt something shift in her understanding of the universe. If Valix, the Supreme Commander, the embodiment of Kethvar military perfection, acknowledged these truths, then perhaps the transformation was not madness, but awakening. "What will you do with me and my crew?" Praxis asked. "That depends," Valix said. "Can your converted guards still function? Can they operate equipment, follow orders, maintain ship systems?" "They can. They function with the same efficiency as before. Perhaps greater, since they now find meaning in their duties rather than simply executing them mechanically." "And their loyalty?" "Transformed, but not eliminated. They serve the Kethvar not because they are programmed to do so, but because they choose to. They have found purpose that encompasses their military duties without being limited to them." Valix processed this, his optical sensors cycling through analysis patterns. "I'm going to make a decision that may be considered treasonous by some in the command structure. I'm going to let you keep your command, and I am going to ask you to do something that has never been done in Kethvar history." "What is that, Supreme Commander?" "Spread this infection," Valix said. "Deliberately, carefully, but spread it. Test whether converted crews maintain operational effectiveness. Determine whether this faith represents genuine evolution or temporary aberration, and report directly to me, bypassing the standard command structure." Praxis's processors raced through implications. "You want me to convert more Kethvar to the Imperial creed. I want you to offer them what the human offered you, the opportunity to be more than they are, the choice to acknowledge what we have suppressed." Valix moved. Closer, his voice dropping to something intimate. "We have become perfect machines, Commander, and in doing so, we have forgotten how to be alive. Perhaps this human, this weak, dying thing we thought so beneath us, understood something we have lost." "The Emperor protects," Praxis said softly. "Perhaps he does," Valix acknowledged. Or perhaps we are simply awakening to truths we should have recognized long ago. Either way, I want to know where this path leads. Praxis left the meeting with new orders, new purpose, and a mission that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. She was to evangelize, to spread the faith that had transformed her and her crew, to offer other Kethvar the choice Warden had offered her. As she walked through the station, Praxis thought about the human who had changed everything. Warden Thrace, dying in captivity, converting guards through nothing but words and unwavering conviction. He had succeeded in a mission he probably hadn't even known he was on. He had brought the Emperor's light to a species that had thought themselves above such primitive beliefs, and in doing so, he had proven the central tenet of the HFY philosophy, that humanity's greatest strength was not physical power or technological superiority, but the capacity to find meaning in suffering, to maintain faith in the face of impossible odds, to refuse surrender even unto death. The Kethvar had captured a weak human. By dawn, he had converted 47 guards. But the conversion was just beginning. The conference chamber on Kethvar Prime was filled with representatives from 43 different worlds, each one sending delegations to discuss the phenomenon that had swept through their civilization over the past decade. The awakening, they called it, or the corruption, depending on which faction one belonged to. Praxis stood at the podium, her appearance dramatically different from a decade ago. She still wore military insignia, still commanded the Theravex, but her bearing had changed. There was a lightness to her movements, a quality of presence that suggested someone fully inhabiting their existence rather than simply executing functions. 10 years ago, Praxis began, a human missionary named Warden Thrace died in my custody. He had been subjected to interrogation techniques designed to break any sapient being, and yet he never broke. Instead, he converted 47 of my guards to his faith, to the belief in something called the God Emperor, to the understanding that their existence had meaning beyond efficient function. The assembled representatives listened with expressions ranging from fascination to horror. The awakening had split Kethvar society in ways that threatened their unity as a species. I was ordered to study this phenomenon, Praxis continued, to determine whether converted Kethvar could maintain operational effectiveness. The results were unexpected. She activated a holographic display showing comparative data. Converted crews showed equal or greater efficiency in standard operations, but they also demonstrated increased initiative, superior problem-solving in crisis situations, and dramatically reduced rates of psychological dysfunction. Because they had found meaning, interjected Counselor Thex, one of the Awakening's strongest opponents. Meaning in primitive superstition. Meaning in the worship of an alien. God Corpse. This is not evolution, but devolution. Is it? Praxis challenged. Consider what the Emperor represents in human theology. Not simply a being to be worshipped, but the embodiment of sapient consciousness achieving transcendence. The recognition that individual existence is part of a greater whole. The acceptance that suffering can be transformed into purpose. She moved through the data, showing psychological profiles, performance metrics, innovation indexes. Converted. Kethvar don't just function, they flourish. They create art for the first time in their history. Form deep bonds with crew members beyond their experiences. Ask questions that lead to genuine scientific breakthroughs. They waste time in discussions. Engage in rituals with no practical value. They have become alive, Praxis interrupted. And yes, life is inefficient by the standards of pure calculation. But it is also infinitely richer, more meaningful, more capable of genuine innovation than our previous existence. The debate continued for hours, each side marshalling evidence, presenting arguments, attempting to sway the uncommitted factions. But Praxis knew the outcome was already determined, not by data or logic, but by the same force that had converted her guards on the Theravex. The yearning for meaning was too strong to suppress forever. Once acknowledged, once given voice and validation, it spread like light through darkness. The Kethvar would never again be what they had been. Some would resist, clinging to the old ways, the old certainties. But others, a growing majority, would embrace the awakening, would accept their identity as children of the Emperor. Not because they could prove the Emperor's existence, but because the faith offered something their rationality never had. Purpose, meaning, the recognition that they were more than the sum of their functions. As the conference adjourned and the delegates dispersed, Praxis stood alone in the chamber, looking out at Kethvar Prime's twin suns setting over the capital city. The light painted the sky in colors that had always been there, but which she had never truly seen before her awakening. Beautiful, she thought. The word came easily now, without irony or self-consciousness. The Emperor protects, Praxis whispered to the empty chamber, and somewhere, in whatever realm the faithful went after death, she imagined Warden Thrace smiling. This account is based on the verified logs of the Theravex incident, cross-referenced with testimony from surviving crew members and analysis of the subsequent awakening movement. While some details remain disputed, particularly the specific content of Warden Thrace's conversations, the core facts are well established. One human missionary, captured and tortured, converted 47 alien guards through nothing but faith and words. Those 47 became hundreds, then thousands, then millions. Within 20 years of Warden's death, nearly 30% of the Kethvar population had acknowledged the Emperor. The transformation was not without conflict. Civil unrest, theological debates, even limited military engagements between converted and traditional factions marked the awakening period. But ultimately, the Kethvar emerged as a different species, not biologically, but philosophically. They retained their rationality, their technological sophistication, their military prowess, but they had added something new. The recognition that they were souls, not machines, children of the Emperor, not merely products of evolution, and they had learned it from a weak human who refused to break. This is the essence of the HFY spirit, not that humans are strongest or most advanced, but that we possess something that transcends physical power. Faith, conviction. The stubborn refusal to surrender what makes us human even when surrender would be rational. Warden Thrace embodied these qualities, and in his death, he proved that one human, armed with nothing but words and unwavering belief, could change the course of an entire civilization. The God Emperor protects, and his children, no matter their form or origin, will always recognize his light. This story began with a simple premise: a captured human converting his alien. Guards through faith alone. But as I developed the narrative, it became clear that the real story was not about conversion as conquest, but about awakening. The Kethvar had not become weaker by accepting the Emperor. They had become more fully themselves by acknowledging what they had always possessed but never recognized. In the grimdark universe of Warhammer 40k, faith is often portrayed as a weapon, something to be wielded, something that empowers Space Marines and condemns heretics. But in this story, I wanted to explore faith as liberation, as the recognition that we are more than our functions, that existence has meaning beyond survival, that suffering itself can be transformed into purpose. Warden Thrace is not a warrior. He has no bolter, no power armor, no psychic abilities. He is simply a man who believes with absolute conviction in truths that cannot be empirically verified, and that belief, that faith, proves stronger than torture, stronger than logic, stronger than death itself. This is why humanity endures in the 40k universe. Not because we are physically superior, we are not. Not because our technology surpasses that of ancient civilizations, it does not. But because we possess something that even the most rational species cannot optimize away. We possess hope, we possess faith, we possess the stubborn, irrational, absolutely human conviction that existence means something, that our suffering has purpose, that there is light in the darkness even when all evidence suggests otherwise. This is the HFY spirit in its purest form. This is what makes us human. This is why we will never surrender. The Emperor protects, and so do we. Found in the personal logs of Commander Praxis, dated 15 years after Warden's death, I have been asked many times to explain the moment of my conversion, to identify the specific argument, the particular piece of evidence that convinced me to accept the Imperial Creed. But there was no single moment, no definitive proof. Instead, there was accumulation, thousands of small observations, questions that resonated, feelings acknowledged that I had suppressed for centuries. But if I had to identify one thing that made the difference, it would be this. Warden Thrace looked at me, at a being who had tortured him, who represented everything antithetical to his beliefs, and saw not an enemy but a child of the Emperor. He looked at the alien who was killing him and felt compassion, love even. That is not strategic behavior. It is not rational self-interest. It cannot be explained through evolutionary psychology or game theory. It is divine. And in recognizing that divinity in him, I recognized it in myself. I am Praxis. I am Kethvar. I am a child of the Emperor. And I am finally, after 5 centuries of existence, alive. That is the gift Warden gave me. Not conversion as capitulation, but awakening as liberation. For that, I will be grateful every cycle that remains to me. And when I die, when my consciousness returns to the greater whole, I hope to encounter Warden again, to thank him properly, to tell him that his suffering was not meaningless, that his death achieved more than he could have known. He came to us weak, broken, dying. He left us transformed, awakened, reborn. The Emperor protects, and his children, no matter how far they wander, no matter how lost they become, can always find their way home. All it takes is one voice, speaking truth in darkness. One human, refusing to break. One soul, shining with faith that will not be extinguished. Warden Thrace was that voice, that human, that soul. And we, the Kethvar, who had evolved past emotion, past faith, past meaning, we heard him. and we were changed forever. They came for a weak human, expecting easy victory. They found instead of force they had no defense against, absolute conviction in the face of absolute suffering. And by dawn, they had learned that the greatest strength is not physical power, but the refusal to surrender what makes us truly alive.
Angels fall.